Hi, it's Jason again at the Centre for Computing History. We're at Synthesized, an event we hold every year, and each year gets better and better. This year is no exception. This year we have a number of machines here which are very, very rare, one of which is this system here, the Greengate DS4. We have Colin Holgate and John Molloy here with us to tell us a little bit about the system.
Yeah.
Colin, what have we got?
Well, what we've got here is a sound sampler, which we made a company to make these sound samplers in the mid-80s. We started off doing an 8-bit sampler board that went in the Apple II on its own, and then later on we had a 16-bit sampler, which is 8-voice polyphonic, that is an external rack unit with a controller board inside of the Apple II GS.
Right.
And the Apple II GS is used for storage of the sounds and for controlling the unit and sending the sounds back. It also does SMPTE encoding and things like this. So the computer's mostly just the menu for driving the rack unit.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So it needs the computer there to operate.
Yes.
So that's controlling the system. So sounds are loaded from the hard drive on the thing into the system? Or
at the time we shipped it, people are probably still using floppy disks. If you'd use a hard drive if you got one, we're better off than that. In this case, we're using a CF card reader. Right. So it's an interface board that can take, I think it's a 512 megabyte card. So it has all of the system software on the card, right, which gives it fairly fast access.
It's incredible that thing's changing it.
I know.
It's all on a CF card.
Yeah.
But that sort of thing
the sampler, the DS4 sampler, where we really pushed the budget, has got 2 megabytes of RAM in it.
Right.
By comparison.
2 megabytes. So what year was this?
The 8-bit sampler was around about 1983. There was a prototype before that Dave Green, who's the hardware designer, he had created the prototype that led on to the company. This was done towards the end of 1986, and most of the units shipped in 1987.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm working out here maybe Dave Green, Colin Holgate, Greengate.
Yes.
Right.
That's correct. And the way that the name came up was interesting in that we spent hours and hours trying to come up with a cool name. And a journalist friend of ours had written about the DS3 prototype in Melody Maker, I think it was, Mark Jenkins. And so he wrote about it, and we had somebody call us up and say, can I come and look at it? He came over and he looked at it and he says, okay, who do I make the check to? And we hadn't come up with a name by then. And Murray Monroe is the other part of Mainframe. His father is talking with the guy and says, he says, make it out to Greengate Productions. And we're in the next room thinking, Greengate Productions, who is that? And he just, on the moment, thought, Dave Green, Colin Holgate, Greengate, and that afternoon he had to go to the bank to set up an account so we could could put the check in.
Yeah. Lucky nobody else already had that name.
Yes.
So it's kind of unusual in some ways, being based around the Apple II there. Other samplers that were out had their own dedicated hardware, but this was quite an interesting way to go because all the development on the system has already been done. So you've got the standard system there, 2GS. Did it work on a 2 as well, an Apple II?
The 8-bit sampler ran on a 2 Plus or the 2E. I don't think it necessarily ran on the 2GS. The 16-bit sampler probably did not run on the 2 Plus, but it did run on the 2E and the 2GS.
Okay. Was there any reason for choosing Apple?
Well, we were Apple fanatics, and
that's basically how we all met originally.
Yeah, we were friends through Apple II.
Apple group back in the early 80s.
And so Dave Green was an Apple II user friend. Naturally, he designed the hardware for the Apple II. And at the time, there were not many machines around to choose from. He was doing this in 1981 and 82. The PC didn't come out until 1981. The Apple II had been out
since...
That
was mostly in the States anyway. We didn't have those PCs over here.
Oh, right. So, and the Apple II was out in 1976, 77. I bought an Apple II Plus in 1980. So me and Dave both had Apple II for a while before he was designing for it. And there was one other sound sampler on the market for the Apple II that I believe at the time, which I think was called the Dicilionics or something like that, very catchy name. And it was a monophonic 8-bit, and Dave was doing a 4-voice 8-bit card. So it was there was nothing else quite like it at the time.
One funny story from the early days is Dave says, "I've got this thing you guys should come have a look at." He was a sort of a friend of the band at the time, and we brought it round and we plugged it into our system. We thought it all sounds a bit like a cassette. You know, it's all a bit kind of thin and weedy. And so he said, what's the only thing I've got the source for? So we whacked up some microphones, started sampling, and we suddenly realised what they would have come up with in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Then Colin got the hard work of actually building them for a while.
Yeah. And within Greengate, Dave did all the hardware design and most of the software programming. I did some of the software programming, but otherwise I was the one who fixed machines for customers. So I was kind of the support guy. Yeah.
So who was using these systems at the time?
All right. Now, there are a lot of the DS3s, there are a few hundred DS3s that shipped. There were only 50 DS4s. And some of the DS3 customers were the people who bought the DS4s. So the names I mentioned, some were only DS3, some were both, some were just DS4. And mostly, it was not necessarily the famous people that used them, but the people who worked with the famous people.
Right.
So we had, and you can help me get the names right, but Stuart Elliott was the drummer for Kate Bush.
Right.
There was Queen's keyboard player. There was the producer for George Michael.
Right.
But there was also the drummer and the drummer and the keyboard player from Boomtown Rats were direct customers. So both of those had a system of ours.
Also, people that become more famous,
Yeah.
like Gavin Harrison, a guy called Jacko,
There was-
who
Yeah.
currently on tour with a band you may have heard of called
King Crimson.
So
at the,
Jacko's doing the singing for Cunningham.
at the time they were local musicians. They were both in Watford, I guess. John's were friends with them, and Gavin's a drummer. I posted a picture of me and Gavin and Jacko in New York because I met them not long ago.
Right.
And one of my Facebook chums saw the picture and he says, "That's Gavin Harrison. He's the drum god. How did that happen?" So I said, "Oh, known him for 30-something years,
Fantastic. So just a little bit on the tech of this thing. We've got a very capable computer, Apple II GS there. There's a link cable that goes between the two. Is that anything normal, or is that something specific to what
It's
you
a
do?
simple 25-pin male-to-female D connector, one-to-one. There's nothing special about the cable itself.
But the interface itself,
Well,
so it's some sort of
So
parallel
the data,
transfer?
the data transfer is much faster.
Well, it's parallel for the data, but there's also wires for the SIMD information to come back to the computer, and also the MIDI. Well, there's MIDI in, out, and through on the rack unit, but the software has to know what keys you're pressing.
Sure.
So there's several data lines as well as the data for transferring the samples from the computer hard drive into the
So you've got your own unique parallel interface effectively into the Apple II. Right, cool, okay. So it has its own memory, which is used for the sample playback, and the data's dumped from floppy disk, hard drive, whatever it is on there, into here when you choose them, right?
I imagine, I don't know this for sure, but I can't think it'd be any other way. But all of the 2 megabytes of memory would be used for the sound sampling, as you do the sound sampling. So that's, at the sample rates we were using, this meant you had 22 seconds of sample time.
Right.
But then you would edit the sounds into short instruments, and you could load up a keyboard split and a set of 8 sounds back into the memory. So the same memory that was recording 22 seconds was now sharing the 22 seconds amongst all the instruments you wanted to load onto it.
I mean, of course, most of the multi-sample instruments we get today, this was kind of like well before that kind of happened. It was kind of the early process of doing that. Although,
same system.
So it made it a lot more useful. I mean, originally with Mainframe, we used it as a drum machine. That was the DS3.
Right.
The whole point of sitting there and being able to playing a drum part when you're recording in a small home studio that have neighbours, suddenly meant we got rid of drummers. There is an irony to that.
Well, I was talking to somebody else earlier here actually. I had a TR-808 at the time, and I was creating sample libraries for a machine, this is a bit later, but the Yamaha SY85, which could do sample playback, but it couldn't sample. So I sampled the drum machine, and then thought, well, I don't need the drum machine now, I've got samples of it. So I sold it for about £600, which was okay back then, but I wish I'd shot myself now. Yeah, they are so valuable, and you still don't quite get the original sound from sampling.
When the DS3 came out, we did have an add-on board that allowed us to write to ROM. So if you had something like
We had an EEPROM writer, and we could take the sound samples from the DS3 and burn drum machine chips.
Right,
And some of
things
our
like the Oberheims and
some of
Yeah.
our customers would just buy the DS3 just to burn EEPROMs to use in their drum machines.
Right, so they
Now
could-
there was actually a comical technical fault in what we did, in that I didn't understand the format of the sound samples, and some of the bits are meant to describe the waveform of the drum sample, but it just ended up being just like a white noise tree at the beginning of the sound.
Well, I didn't know that either.
Tell me you
Yeah.
fixed
I
it.
thought they were pure
No,
waveform.
no. Some people like Simon Crowe from Boomtown Rats. That's the kind of thing he would do. He would wire up a mic or something on his drum. When he hit his drum, it would trigger the DS3 to play this really grungy sound to add to the real drum sound.
One of the other early DS3 customers was a guy called David Cunningham. He had a band
Oh,
called
yeah.
Flying Lizards. You know
Oh,
that?
yes.
And he also,
Money.
ironically, he
Yes.
also produced a lot of the Michael Nyman stuff. I think Michael Nyman taught him at college.
There's
and
a-
so he became the producer for Michael's
There's a-
material. But what he liked is that on the DS3, because we didn't have the filtering that most musicians wanted, you could get some really interesting aliasing noises at the bottom of the keyboard. So when you started to lower it down, you could get sounds that you just couldn't create from anything else.
No, absolutely. We were
there's
just
a-
talking about that on
There's a bit of irony,
machines.
with David Cunningham in particular. John and Murray were working on a track which was, if you remember, 999, right? So this was different. It was a sampler-driven dance track, and they were working hard on it. And then David Cunningham brought out Sex Machine, which he had done using delay lines. He hadn't used a sampler at all. He just used a delay line unit.
Right.
And so he basically stole the thunder from what these two were doing, which was upsetting at the time, but then he became our customer. So we ended up selling him the hardware that he went on to use instead of the delay lines.
Remember one frightening demo we did on a Saturday. We went into a studio in London to show off to the producer of Scritti Politti at the time.
Right.
And the whole place was virtually full of AMS units with all the vocals for a given track, and it's sort of saying, do not turn these off under pain of death, you know. So,
Yes.
it was,
So, what does this thing sound like? Let's have a
All
look,
right.
see it in operation.
I'll find that out, but he just reminded me of another thing. Max Headroom. The guys at Max Headroom used the DS3 for many of the sound effects on the Max Headroom
To do the
series.
kind of stuttering.
Yeah, I don't know. No, that was probably other effects, but they were one of our customers.
Oh, right.
So the unit will play back samples you've done, or it will sample to make new sounds from. So just in the interest of time and efficiency, we've got it set up to play back some choir sounds. So with a MIDI keyboard, and John's going to just play some chords.
So
And
this is a 2-octave sampling set. So you've got, as you can see, basically there's 3 different samples here.
Yeah.
And then you switch to another one.
Yeah.
And then to that one.
Yeah. On channels 1, 2, and 3 there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So basically, as these come in, you map them using there was great flexibility. Colin's got quite a funny story about why we had the flexibility in this. Did you want to say about the?
oh, just in the DS3, we had a problem on production when the first boards came back. The keyboard cable had been wired in reverse image, so every key on the keyboard was wrong, and so we looked like we were going to have to make a new batch of boards. But I suggested we'll just rewire it in software.
Yeah.
Every key coming in, you know what it should have been. So having done that, when it came to keyboard splits, we could have any key be any sound. It wasn't simply that all the ones below middle C were one and all above. So, it carried on into the DS4. We used the same mapping of the keyboard to sounds that we'd used
But
before.
it made it very quick to put drums in and then other vocal parts, and you could actually build up quite complicated splits on the keyboard. You know, and
Yeah.
certainly with the other band that Murray and I had, the Noise of Art, when we performed live, we had to use like 2 octaves of one sound, 2 octaves of another sound, and then various mysterious noises in the
Sound
bottom
effects
half.
and the right.
Yeah, so it's quite fun. What are you going to do, Colin?
The other side of it is the sampling, and I'm just going to jump out of the playback menu, and if I go back into the main menu, and now I'm just going to say sample and edit. So we go into the sampler, and I've just got some classical music on here to sample. So we've got a waveform.
There you go.
All right, so the waveform's going, if I start it sampling, and I could do this up to 22 seconds, but I'll just stop it. So if I stop there and come back out of here again, we could play it to hear what we've got. You could probably turn the volume up a bit.
Which channel are we on?
I got it.
Oh, that's a band note.
It is, yeah. Now the natural note is the A here. And being a sound sampler, it's not like a computer-generated thing. It's just sound. So as you go higher, they're shorter.
Yeah, absolutely. Because on modern samplers, you can now time stretch and keep that pitch the same.
And then there
Far
are
more difficult back then.
there's a waveform editor where you can go in and set the start and the end of the sound. Also the start and the end of a loop point if you need it to loop.
Right.
And you would.
So you've got the
Go
line
in and
there, so you
fine-tune
can try
that.
and get a zero crossing point to get the click.
Yeah.
When we had auto.
And we can also zoom in on the waveform considerably. So if we zoom in on that, and then I can inch forward and backwards till I find a crossing point that I like, and then if I just say set that as the start, and then I can go to somewhere else to set the end, and we can jump up and down the waveform to find an ending point, and similarly with the looping. And then when you back out of here, it would be edited accordingly.
When you did the looping, you could also it would also auto search for crossing points, and it would search through the sample to see which was kind of close. So that could take. I mean, it's an Apple II. It did take a little bit.
That was a lot to ask of it,
yes,
but
it
did it if you give it the time. Right.
Exactly.
I don't know how successful this is going to be, but I just tried changing the start and the end point, see if it actually worked.
Bang.
Well, it's a bit long, yeah, but still, you get the general idea.
I know what you mean. So.
There were some interesting technical challenges, by the way. I don't know if we had the problem with the DS4. With the DS3, the first version didn't have any envelope control. There was no touch sensitivity. It was straight out. So how do you stop a sound in the middle of nowhere without it clicking? Was one of the kind of technical things we had to start to figure out.
So how'd you do it?
Well, it was one of the ones I came up with the idea for. What David tried was he tried ramping down the sound. That gave a third. If he literally took it as a slow DC ramp, it became its own frequency. What I suggested was, when you release the note, look ahead in memory for the next crossing point and set that to be when the sound ends.
Okay.
So the waveform's own crossing point was when the sound ended, and it gave a click-free finish to the sound. And the same kind of thing came in with the looping. If you were looping in software, which we were, the chip in the 8-bit one was either direct memory access on one channel and it could loop perfectly, or it was software controlled on 4 channels and we were using it in that mode. So what we did there was, when you come to a loop point, instead of jumping back when the CPU gets around to it, which would cause a clunk, it would just get around to it. So as the waveform's going up and down, the loop kicked in, it would go to the matching point at the beginning of the loop. So instead of going to the first sample of the loop, it would go to the end sample of the loop based on how far it gone too far.
Overshot.
Yeah, and so there was another click-free solution without having to
in the early
be too clever.
Colin would be doing a lot of this work with the hardware. In Murray's house, and Murray and I would be in the bedroom of the studio and recording. And that was kind of a 9-to-5 job musically. But lunchtime used to be mixing two tins of soup together, and we'd sit down and have the soup, random combination. But over one of the soup things, we said to Colin, why can't we do that 3D waveform that Fairlight does?
Oh, I know this anecdote better than that even, which is, I didn't know what Fairlight was really, but they wanted to do, is it R or N? What's the Fairlight page?
Page R is the drumming.
What's the one with the 3D waveform that's they're famous for in all screenshots? So he says, oh, can we do that? And I didn't really want to do it just for the sake of doing it. And there was some kind of gathering at Murray's house, and I was in the bedroom coding away, And so I said, okay, I'll have a go at it. So while the party's going on downstairs, I was coding this 3D waveform effect. But the way I did it, I had many more waveforms than Fairlight had, because I had no idea what their one looked like. But what it was good for, the way that I did it, was it showed phasing. So within the topology of the 3D thing, you could see when things were going in and out of phase. And it was in the looping software, so not only could you set crossing points to get a good loop, you could look at the phasing to see that the phasing would loop well as well.
I was going to say, so you loop the phasing with it as well?
Yeah, well, you look at the waveform to judge that it's going to go in and out of phase an exact amount.
Yeah,
yes.
That sounds musically right.
A few years after that happened.
Oh, sorry. I did it that evening. While the party was going, a couple of hours later, I got it going.
Missed the party.
I know.
I know, but we then continued the celebration after we'd done it. There was a French company that actually used the samples of the game as landscapes.
Right.
So they actually,
really?
Yeah, it was something that appeared, while I was when we moved on further on.
Right. I'm just thinking about they could use the Flight of the Bumblebees sound for a Flight of the Bumblebee game.
Yeah, it might be.
That'd be neat.
So sounds was this used to create? I mean, sampling. We've spoken before on another video we're doing about how sampling was slightly overlooked at a certain point as just this way of replacing a piano or a cello or whatever, which is kind of missing the point of what a sampler is best at. In terms of how you saw this and maybe how you were using it, what were you doing with it? What were you sampling?
Well, we wanted to do something that would demonstrate what the DS3 would do at the time when we were first working on it. And so at that point, Paul Morley was on the radio talking about the art of noise,
right,
and saying we can only make this sort of music because we've got the best studios in the world. And I thought, right, it's time we can do this. And so Murray raised the banner, and we spent a couple of days hitting things and blowing things and generally gathering a whole source of material together, including, I think it's fairly safe to say now, there's an early Art of Noise track that took We're in the Army Now,
right,
and split it into different things, and they kind of cut it all up. Well, we nicked it from the Art of Noise and reassembled it.
Right.
So, I mean, it's that kind of humour of kind of like, you've broken it, we'll fix it, kind of, it was quite fun. So, it was quite good. And in fact, at one point, Anne Dudley came round to have a look at the
There's a husband who was interested.
Anne Dudley came round with her husband, yes.
Yeah.
And we'd just finished the masters, so we were making sure they were pushed under the bed so she couldn't see the Noise of Art stuff was actually about to be cut and released.
I think we heard at one point that Trevor Horn had seen it and was amused by it, so that's the main thing, I guess. And actually, Jacko, that we mentioned earlier, he recorded stuff at Psalm East. We did both studios, but we would go with the DS4 to help him out in the Psalm studios. I saw Trevor Horn one time doing the security check around the building and trying to avoid eye contact.
Steve Jobs of the audio.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for bringing it in today. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that. It's a really interesting system. And well, thank you very much.
Can I say one last thing? This unit that I brought in is the one that I own, which was given to me by one of my customers. And I'm not a musician. It's been sat at home not being used at all this time. And it has not been plugged in and used in 26 years till we set it up for the museum. But it worked. It still worked.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be leaving it here, so people come into the museum will be able to play with it.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and find the manual I wrote.
Well, yeah, even more thanks then. I mean, that
Sure.
that is incredible. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
And I mean, it is. It's incredible these things stand the test of time in that way.
Right.
I mean, our 2GS, because we gave you another one to begin with, didn't work quite so well. So it's a second 2GS we had to get out to get this working. But then that's the fun of all this, just trying to breathe life back into systems that haven't seen any love for a few years.
Right.
So, no, thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
And enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Cheers. Thank you.